following on from the course on actuals, audit and analysis, we're now going to do a live review of a project. So our project is Project Horizon, and there is a synopsis here. But in brief, we are hosting a conference and it's going to be held 3 years in a row, scheduled to take place in September in year 1 and year 2 and April in year 3. We're going to be looking at the year 1 report at the end of the year. So here is my template in a format that a donor might have provided or that we might have created ourselves. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is put in the dates very clearly, because whilst I know what years my project covers, the person reviewing it or the auditors might not exactly know the precise dates, and it just makes it clearer and easier to make sure that we're looking at the right set of transactions. So here we are at the 31st of the 12th, 21, so we've got a full year. So I have already put in a formula here for my remaining budget, which is just a simple budget minus actuals. And I've already put in my percentage spend, my tracking rate. And as this is the end of year 1, the tracking rate will be 100% if we're fully spent. So now we're ready to bring the actuals into our report. So our full transaction listing is here, and we can see that this is the Project Horizon transaction listing, 1st of January to 31st of December 21. Okay, so I'm happy that that's the right periods. I've also clearly marked here what my last transaction number is. And the way I have found that is by using my filter on the transaction numbers. And if I scroll down to the bottom, yeah, I can see that my last here is 192385. And remember, the reason I'm including that is that if we were making amendments to the report or running the transaction listing again and wanted to update new transactions, I'd know which transactions I need to add in and which ones have already gone into the report. So I'm just going to have a quick navigate around my transaction listing to see what I'm working with. So I can see that filters have already been applied. And if I scroll down, I can see that I have already frozen the panes. And just as a reminder of that, let's just go through it once more. So here, if I unfreeze, and so that I can navigate down more easily and retain the row headers, I'm simply going to select here and freeze my panes. So now I can keep scrolling down and my row headers are always fixed. Right, so I'm just going to control arrow to the bottom, and I'm just going to highlight up to the top here, and I can see that I've actually got 328 transactions that I'm working with, okay? So the first thing I'm going to do is I need to summarize these transactions by account number so that I can report them by budget line in the report. So hopefully we can remember how to do a pivot table, but let's just run through that. So the first thing I'm going to do is capture the data that I want to summarize in my pivot table. So I'm going to use Control-Shift-Arrow to capture that data. Now I'm inserting a pivot table, so I use the Insert ribbon. And if you remember on this one, because we've already highlighted the data that we want to summarize, we simply press OK. And now I'm going to summarize by account number. So I'm going to drag that into my rows, and I'm going to drag my amount into the values section. And there we go. I've got my pivot table by budget line. Now I want to be using this data, so I don't lose it, I'm going to label this tab, this worksheet there, summary pivot. One of the only drawbacks with pivot tables is that if we try and use formulas that reach into the pivot table, it doesn't work very well. And so I'm actually now going to copy and paste this pivot table, and I'm going to paste it here by values only. And I'm actually going to use this as my data to pull into my reporting template. So on my reporting template, I'm now going to pull the data in using a VLOOKUP. So let's revise that. So we start with our equals and we go to our formulas, our VLOOKUP, OK. And the value that we're going to select, you can see here that I have coded up my template with the budget codes. So I'm going to use that, my account code. And my table array is here in my summary pivot. And remember that I need the lookup value to be the far left column. So that's my account codes. And then the result is in just column 2 in this case. So let's highlight that table. Column 2, false. OK. And that's great. You can see that it has dragged in the result. And now I'm just going to do the final step in a VLOOKUP that we mustn't forget, which is just to carefully highlight the cell references, and we'll do function F4 to get those dollar signs in to make it an absolute reference. So now I hit enter. And now I'm ready to drag my formula down. There we go. And we've got some NAs come up, which I would expect. And that's because if you look here, they're just looking up a blank. It's just the format of the table. So we don't need those NAs. So let's get rid of them by using our filters again. Select NA. Now I'm just going to delete those, not the ones in grey though, because they have a formula in. And now I can see that I must have eliminated my NAs because that is working at the bottom there. And here we go. So we have our first draft of the reporting template. So what are our first impressions of the report? The first thing I want to highlight is that for the negative numbers here, which represent overspends, I've just used a format which shows that they are clearly distinguished from positive numbers. And I've just done that by selecting this number format, this negative red here. So if I then scroll down, let's see how we've done. So at the end of our project, it's looking that we are spent 101%, so just over budget, by a small amount of 2,000. So maybe our first impression is that actually we're not doing too badly. Let's just have a look at this clause, though, that's been taken from the donor contract. And in it, it says that any variances above and below 10% for any year in any of these subcategories are accepted and do not need reporting to the donor. The subcategories are as follows: salaries, activities, overheads, and audit costs. Forecast variances greater than 10% must be advised to the donor for a formal budget adjustment. Carry forward of underspend must also be donor approved. So what is important is that we are looking at not only our percentage spend line by line, but we need to be checking that within our subcategories, there is not 10% variance. So what I have done to monitor that is below the project, I have also done a little summary by subcategory. And so all I've done here is put in formulas that sum up all the costs by each subcategory. So for salaries here, and then for activities here, and so on. And then the same formulas here for remaining budget and our percentage spends. So whilst overall we are 101%, we can see that actually we do have some work to do to check our subcategories, because at the moment we would have an issue reporting this to the donor because we have a percentage variance of more than 10% on activities and overheads. So one thing that we haven't done yet is the reconciliation between the report and the transaction data. So let's have a look at that. So our costs here have come to 152,175, and on our transaction listing they were 1,422. So let's put here the report total equals 152,175. So we have a difference of 9955, which in this case, the 9955 is our admin fee, because our admin fee is an automatic calculation of 7% of the total costs. And so the template is calculating that, but it clearly hasn't been entered into our accounting system yet. So that's a catch up that we will need to do when we're happy that the actuals are final. But for now, I'm happy that our report equals our transaction listing. And so this time I don't need to do that circular check. If there was a difference, I would need to do the VLOOKUP again, and I perform the VLOOKUP here, taking in my report numbers to find any differences. But for now, I'm happy that we are taking in all the transactions into our donor report. So let's start our in-depth review, taking into account the things that are on the review checklist. So I'm going to drag this a little bit wider, and I am going to add a commentary column. Now, because I'm fussy, I am going to highlight and format my cells, and I'm going to put it in size 8, and I'm going to wrap the text, because I know then that when I write my commentary, it's neat and I have space to write a few words of description. So the first line, my program manager 4001. So that's a little overspent. So let's have a look and see if we can figure out why. So 4001. So I'm going to take my accounts here, 4001. Let's see what I've got. So I can see that each month there's a net salary and payroll taxes, and they're from January to December. So I'd expect there to be 24 transactions. And if I count, highlighting and looking at my count here, I have 28 transactions. So that's a red flag for me. I can see that actually the costs are very uniform. So that seems to be logical. But if I look over here, this is where I'm beginning to see something strange, is that I have Yolanda Chaffee. And I know that my program manager is Elizabeth Lewis. So let's have a look at these. Well, I think potentially what has happened is that Yolanda is not on this project, and that is likely to be a misposting. So I think that's a hard error. So I'm going to highlight that up in red. I've got another error here. So let's highlight those up in red, and I'm going to say that they are potentially misposted. Okay, let's copy that description in. And here I'm going to put my notes. Okay, so that would explain why that one was a little bit overspent. So we know that we'll need to go back and correct that. But let's continue our review before we deal with corrections. So back to our reporting template. So our 4002 Finance and Admin Officer, well, 101%, that looks good. Let's just have a little check, 4002. Take this one off, select the next. Okay, so let's check for those 24 transactions. There's actually 25 transactions, but I can see that the pattern is the same, and I can see quite quickly that this is the one that stands out. So Jonas has had an ACCA subscription fee charged, which is for their professional qualification. So I think that's fine to charge that one. So I am happy to leave that there, and that actually accounts perfectly for that overspend, but I think that's a reasonable cost. So I'm going to leave that for now. My M&E officer, 4005, tracking pretty well, 4005, let's have a look. 4005, there we go. And let's have a look for those 24 transactions. I do have 24 transactions, and I can see that my pattern here, it does change in April. It only changes a little, and actually that is in line with my knowledge that Exxon did have a small pay rise at that point. So that makes perfect sense to me. So I'm happy with that one. Let's have a look at the country director. Now, this one is a little bit underspent on 76%. So country director. I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'll use the account name and do a search this time just to remind us of all the different ways we can use filters. So here's our country director. I think I'll do my 24 transaction check. Only 18. So let's have a look. Let's have a look through the dates maybe. January, February, March, April, May, June, July. And then we skip straight from July to November. These are all on 5% of the salary, and the name remains the same. So this looks like we've missed some transactions from August, September and October. Now, maybe the country director was fully charged on other projects, didn't have time to commit to this project during those months. There could be a valid reason, but I think it's probably more likely that that has just been overlooked and not charged. So what I'm going to do is copy one of the transactions. I'm just going to remind myself here of missed transactions. And I know that it was for July. These would be the same amounts. And then I'm going to do two more, and this would be August and September and September. So I know that I've got to go back and address those when I do my corrections. Now, opposite problem with the HR officer, very overspent this one. So let's have a look, 4003 HR. So let's have a look here, HR. So I have 24 transactions, great, but why is it overspent? Well, if I have a look at the amounts here, I can very quickly see that something has gone wrong here. That is far too large a charge. So one of the things that I mention in the review checklist is just to sometimes gross up the salaries to see if they make sense. So Isidore is being charged 8% of salary. So let's gross up the charge and see what the result would be to see if it makes sense as a gross salary. So yes, it does make sense as 100% gross salary, but what I can see here is that also this means that 100% of salary has been charged for September. And yes, maybe there was some HR incident happening that required 100% of time, but that's very unlikely, I would say. So I think that this is probably an error again. So let's go to our so let's highlight that up as a hard error and say that we need to reduce to 8%. And the same for the taxes thereon. I can see that that's the normal payroll taxes of the salary. And then as I'm doing this, I also just noticed that 8% is the standard charge, it seems, but there are some other percentages charged. Now in January, I've got 16% charged. And actually that makes sense to me because I know that at the beginning of the project, Isidore in HR had to work a lot more than normal months because there was the recruitment, the setting up of the project, the contracting, etc. So I think that's reasonable to have charged more in January. So I'm happy to leave that for now. But here I notice that there's 20% written for October, and yet the transaction is still the same as the charge for 8%. So I assume that this is just a typing error. So it's not a hard kind of error affecting the numbers, but we might want to change it just so that the auditors aren't confused. And in fact, I notice now that it's here as well, 20%. So we'll just make a little note here and decide if we're going to change that. So should be 8% in narrative description. Yeah, and I'm putting it as orange because it's not a hard error, as I said. It's not going to affect the actual numbers, but it could be something that auditors might flag. Okay, I'll just remove that. I don't need that anymore, the grossing up. So let's go back. So we have kind of explained now to ourselves why that was so overspent, because there was 2,175 charged when actually it should have been a lot lower. So that makes up the majority of that overspend. Plus we had that extra effort charged in January. So finally in salaries, we have our logistics officer at 83%. 83%. So let's have a look at that one. 83% for our logistics officer. So here we are, logistics, and let's have a look. We've got 20 transactions, but they are very consistent. And if I look in my my months, I could also view them through my filter. But if I look in my months, I can see that actually January and February aren't charged. And that's fine because I know that Lennox only started on the project in March. So that's why there is a little bit of an underspend. So let's just document those reasons. So go backwards. On the logistics officer, we know that only started in March. Hence slight underspend, and that makes sense to anybody reviewing the report. The 235 was there as a misposting to be corrected. On the country director, we had some missed months, didn't we? We had August to, actually we had July to October missed. Yep, so they'll need correcting. Our M&E officer, I think we said was just about okay. I think we can just put this one tracking as expected. Finance and admin officer also was tracking as expected, just had that extra exam fee, which we're absolutely fine with. And the program manager, there were some transactions for Yolanda not on project to be removed. Okay. Great. Okay, so now my salaries are reviewed. So let's move on to our activities. Now, venue hire at 47%. I would have thought that we'd had the conference in September. We've had plenty of time to get the invoicing in for that. So let's see what's happened on our venue hire. So venue hire in the venue. Yep, there we go. And let's see what's happened here. So we only have 3 transactions. We have our deposit, 600, okay. We have 50% prepayment, less 600 reservation. Okay, and then we have some extras for food and drink. So it looks like what's happened is we haven't got the second invoice, the second 50%, that seems to be missed. So in our missed transactions, I think we need to make sure we note that. So in our missed transactions, and what it would be is that has already had 600 removed. So it looks like there's a 3,000 invoice missing. So we're going to need to go back to our accounts department and look for that missing invoice, or look in the accounts system, see if it's been misposted to another project. Pause, hang on. Hi, I'm coming. So on my next activity, so I'll just remark that there's a missing invoice to be investigated. Spell it right though, shall I? Investigated. There we go. Backup generator, just a little overspent. Let's have a look at that. 7012 is our code there. I'll just go back to the code here, 7012 it was, wasn't it? So I've got my deposit, import fees and taxes, payment on delivery, and some generator fuel, which I think is reasonable to be charged. So even though it is a little overspent because of that fuel mainly, I think that's okay for now. So let's leave that as it is. Projector. Now there's no spend on this, and if it's an asset and we needed it in year 1 of the project, why haven't we bought it already? So that seems strange. So, well, we're not going to find it in our transaction listing because it's not there, but let's just have a check that it hasn't been posted to another activity or stationery, etc. So let's just search for the word projector. No sign of it. So, and actually that agrees to what I know about the project, that we didn't buy it because we decided we didn't need it. So in the end, we'll just put not needed. Our stationery budget, 89%, kind of tracking fairly okay. You know, hard one to budget really, stationery, you just don't know exactly what your requirements are going to be. Let's have a look at what we have posted there on 7008. We've got some photocopying, we've got pens, flip chart, paper, ink cartridges, nothing untoward. All our costs look fairly normal. So I think we'll just leave that one as fine. So our international flights, 92%. Okay, that seems fairly reasonable. Let's have a look at the flights, because what I do know about our project is that we actually did have fewer speakers in the end than we had budgeted. So I can see here that my speakers' fees and allowances is a little under budget, which I would expect. And my international flights are also a little under budget. So maybe that's the story that's being told here. But let's have a look. 6,000 international flights. 6,000. Okay, so we have got E. Lewis, which is Elizabeth, the program manager, going to Burkina Faso and Cameroon, and I know that was for a research trip, so that makes sense. But here I have some unusual transactions because I have some reversals. So this was posted and on the first of the month, and then I can see it was reversed and it was the same invoice. And then that's a different invoice actually, and that one was posted, oh no, it was reversed for Exxon. But I can't actually see another cost. Let's just filter on this amount, 1100. Now it gives me no matches, and that's because I've got commas in my numbers. So if I do 1100, let's have a look at all the transactions of that amount. Okay, so on international travel, I've actually just got 2 reversals. So that seems definitely to be a hard error. Interesting. And the other thing I notice now is that this is 1110 and this is 1100. So it looks like maybe that was posted at the wrong amount and then reversed to try and correct it, but reversed at the wrong amount, or the correct amount. So there is definitely a hard error going on here that I need to correct. So I'm going to put these and say reversal to investigate. Yeah. Okay, and then, yes, because now I can see here another 1100. That's interesting because I know it's a different invoice and that's a different speaker coming from Cameroon. It's probably just the same airline because it's got the same invoice format. So that one looks fine. So definitely some work to do there to correct international flights. And at the moment, yes, I'm netting to an under of 1,000, but it might be that that cost is reinstated, which would mean that I'm even more accurately on budget. Local transport, 1,500, budget versus actuals. Looks like that this was just an easy one to budget for and account for. So 6004. Yeah, we just had one invoice for our local transport during our conference to transport people back and forth between hotels. So I'm comfortable with that. On to our accommodation costs. They're a little over, but again, they could have been one that was quite tricky to budget. So 6001. Let's have a look, 6001. Accommodation costs, okay. So I have actually got here some accommodation for our team when they went on their research trips abroad. And then I have the big invoice for our conference guests. And so we're a little overspent. Maybe we just under budgeted for the foreign trips abroad, but you know, generally we're okay. So I'm just going to make my notes here while I remember. So accommodation costs slightly over budget. Over budget due to research trips, probably under budgeted. And now I've got my local transport, which was fine. My international flights, there is a reversal to investigate. My speakers' fees and allowances are going to be investigated now. So let's look at 5002, 5002, 5002. Trainer fees, yeah, it just happens to have a slightly different name in the accounting code to the name that we're using in the budget, but that's fine. It's still exactly the same code and the same costs being charged. So here we have speaker fees. with conference allowances. And again, we have, it looks like we have a little bit of something strange going on with our reversals. 2240 seems to be the number. So just to make it easier to review, I'm going to have a look at all of those together. So this was, okay, so this is a separate issue. That was 70% of an invoice. But then we put this one in and we reversed it. And then we reinstated it and we reversed it. And then on the same date, we reversed it again. And sometimes that happens. You know, there might have been a different accountant who also had the request to do that reversal, and there was a bit of a mix-up, so it's accidentally been done twice. So we've definitely got that reversal to reverse. So let's mark that one as a hard error. So that is to reverse, okay? So once we've done that, that is going to be bringing back up the cost of that one. So there is a reversal to remove. Okay, so now we're on to our conference advertising, 144%, little overspent. So let's have a look at this one in more detail. What I should say is that I do have a comprehensive budget template for this project. And in fact, the budget template is what we will be looking at in detail in one of the next courses on budgeting and forecasting. But for now, let's just have a look at an extract from it so that we can see how the conference advertising and training and printing was budgeted. So for conference advertising, year one lump sum for advertising, press, social media, cost reduced year 2 and 3, okay, and then training materials, hire graphic designer, and then printing of conference handouts based on previous printing invoices. Okay, so that's what our budget was intended for. So now let's go and have a look at how we actually spent our money in those categories. So on our transaction listing, let's actually take a look at all. I've got my filter on here as well. Just take that one off. So let's actually have a look at those 3 categories all together. So we were going to be looking at our, I need to look at the numbers. Let me check my numbers. We're going to be looking at 509, 504 and 510. 509, 5004 and 510. So 5009. So actually 5010 we don't have any costs for. And yeah, we don't have any costs there either. So that makes sense. So let's see what we have spent on. So we've got a podcast production, website development, digital mail shots, Facebook advertising, graphic design, printing, and video production. So a little bit different to what we actually budgeted for, but this is in line with our knowledge of the project, or my knowledge of the project, in that once we started the project, we decided that actually we'd perhaps modernize our approach to advertising and information dissemination. So instead of a more traditional means, we've decided actually to go in for a podcast production and digital advertising, website advertising. And so we've ended up spending a little bit differently to how we budgeted. And that's fine, but it just also means that we need to explain that a little bit in our commentary. So here we'll say overspend due to change in strategy and focus on kind of digital media advertising. Our training materials design, well, that was the same reason, so we'll just put those in. And then this one was not spent because funds diverted to the advertising and materials design budgets. Now, as long as we come in within our 10% band by the activities, we don't necessarily need to be doing huge reallocations to take costs from these two lines to reallocate them here. So before we kind of get ourselves into a tizzy, which I know we do, thinking we must reallocate, before we do that, let's just see how we would end up on the 10% benchmarks, because we run the risk of making errors with reversals, with typing errors, etc., if we start reallocating when we don't need to. So our final activities are our baseline assessment and post-conference monitoring. So let's take a look at those. Firstly, baseline assessment 5001. 5001. Oh, try that again. Didn't have my number lock on. 5001. So we have a 30% payment, a 70% payment. That seems fine. We also have a hotel, which I guess, you know, we could have charged it to accommodation in one of the other activities, but I guess as this was particularly related to baseline and perhaps some research at the beginning of the project, 28th of April, yeah, it's also justifiable that it could be charged there. So I don't think we need to really do anything about that just yet. And our next one, post-conference monitoring, was 64%, 5008. So let's have a look at that one, 5008. And here we have some software subscriptions, podcast production for a post-conference, okay, online event, webinar facilitator. And again, I think the reason for the underspend here was actually due to a change in strategy again. So I think I will mention that that was the change in strategy resulted in underspend. And on this one, we can just remark that it includes accommodation for a baseline research trip by staff, which was not budgeted. Okay. But we don't need to worry and remove that cost unless we find that after all our corrections, we can't afford to fund it from the project, but we'll leave it for now. So that's our activities concluded. And now we're going to move on to the review of our overheads. So office rental, well, office rental is something that we'd expect to be very on track, because normally we would have our rental contract at the beginning of the year and when the project's budgeted. And here I can see 104%. Yes, it looks pretty much like we knew what our costs would be and we have come in on budget. But let's just have a quick look at 7003 office costs. 7003 office costs. Yeah, and they're fairly standard, aren't they? Here we go. Same cost month by month. And then it goes up to 375. So we must have had a increase in our contract. And let's just check that we've got 12 transactions for each month. Yes, we have. And I can see that they are neatly in order, Jan, Feb, March, etc. Now, one thing I would say is that one of the reasons that I am easily able to review all of these transactions is because in my example here, the descriptions are very good. Like I can see here that they are entered in the same standard format each month, and hence it's very easy for me to spot a difference because I can see easily Jan, Feb, March, etc. following on. And likewise in all of my payroll transactions, if I search payroll, there is a standard format that's gone in each time, which makes it very easy for me to review. And the other thing I would say, it's easy for me to search for items like, say, let's say taxi, because the spellings are correct. And these sound like small details, but they're actually huge in meaning that your data becomes easily searchable and for spotting errors in patterns. So it really is worth taking the time to make sure that the descriptions that you enter into your accounting system are correctly spelt, are standard each month, and include as much information as you need, even if you have to summarize some things like the dates or names, because they're also a tool that the auditors will use to get a first impression of whether that cost makes sense being charged on the project. Okay, so back to our overheads review. Next, we have utilities, 144%. So for this one, I'm just going to nip back to my budget template and remind myself how I budgeted for the utilities line. So as I said before, we will look at this budget template in some detail in the next course. But for now, let's have a look at what we've included in our utilities budget. So we had water, electricity, generator fuel, we had internet costs, post box and postage costs, and we had a contingency in there for repairs, improvements, health and safety, which, you know, is reasonable because it is a budget that is more difficult to get exactly right, because, you know, we just don't know when extra office costs are going to come up that may be necessary to make sure that our staff are working in a safe environment. So now let's go and have a look at the transactions that we posted. 7004. Let's take that filter off first. 7004. So we've got a lot of things charged here, lots of transactions. So let's have a look. So we've got our website fees at 60. So let's just have a look at our perhaps website. Let's try web and see what we get. So we've got, oh, that's just an annual fee. Okay. Charge once off. Then I can see that we've got these airband internet costs. So let's try and have a look at those. Airb, yeah. So I'd expect there to be 12 transactions, which there's not. There's only 10. And here, 55 a month, 2 months there, 1 month, 2 months. 100% has been charged in August rather than 50%. Okay, but maybe that's an error. I think I'm going to highlight that up and say that should be 50% charged, not 100%. And September, now in September, not only have we accidentally charged it 100%, we've also made a typo, a huge typo actually, that's made a big difference. So should be charged at 100, 50%, not 100, and typo to correct. And then it's gone up in October, November, December to 70. Fair enough, there might have been an increase on the contract. Okay, so back to reviewing our utilities. Let's have a look at other costs that are in there. Got a broken toilet. I think we can justify spending the money to correct that. Chamber of Commerce subs, computer service, cleaning products. These all seem pretty reasonable. Bank charges. Now, that was something that I didn't necessarily see budgeted for in the utilities budget. Bank charges. Okay, and so what I can see here, we've got 20, just haven't gone to the top. We've got 24 transactions, I think. Let's just count them up. So each month we have made a charge for our bank charges on our local and donor currency. And I think that's reasonable. We might have overlooked them in budgeting, but it's a small cost and it's a reasonable cost and it's a necessary cost of doing the project. So I've no objection to those being there. So we know that actually this is mainly overspent due to typing error on internet costs. Yeah, and once we correct that, hopefully, well, we know that about 1,000 will go, so it's going to be a lot less overspent. So next we have our motor vehicle fuel, 7,000, and our vehicle repair budget. So motor vehicle fuel, 7,000. Let's have a look at that. And yeah, I can see what I'm happy about actually is if I look that the same number plate keeps being charged, which gives me some satisfaction that the correct project vehicle has been charged for fuel. And then, I mean, here, look, there's clearly a hard error there. And I definitely need to add a correction there. This is clearly a typo to correct. Motor vehicle repairs and maintenance, 70%. Let's have a look. Motor vehicle repairs. Can't quite remember the budget code, but I'll just type in repairs here, see what I have. Repairs, okay, great. So I have a new set of tyres, yep, for the same vehicle, service, brake pads, track and trace system, warning equipment. Yep, so they all seem quite reasonable, but we were just a little bit underspent because that one's quite hard to budget for. So this one there is a typo to correct. And there's another typo there, typo to correct. And here we have, you know, just not as many repairs needed as budgeted for. We have no audit fees at the moment, which makes sense because we're in year one, and then our 7% is just an automatic calculation of the costs above. However, because we have overspent, in this case, we would need to cap it at 9,822. But this is just a draft and we've now got to make all the corrections. So we're not actually going to make the corrections now because in reality, a lot of the corrections are transactions that you need to process in your accounting system. But what I want to illustrate is the power of review, because our first impression of this project was that we'd done pretty well, 101% spent, and things look good. However, we dug a little deeper, and when we looked at the clauses in our donor contract, we realized that rather than the line by line and the overall 101%, the important thing was to make sure that these percentages would be within 10% of 100% by the end. So if we had not looked at that analysis, we might not even have focused our attention on the review of the individual lines. I've also got another version here where I have calculated all the transactions that we do need to make to correct. And here is my summary. And what I've done here is said that these, if I was in an audit, these are the items that would have been disallowed because they are errors or not genuine costs of the project. And so if we hadn't have done the review, these would have been disallowed in an audit. So some of these we looked at, yeah, there's Yolanda's salary, that would have been disallowed, she's not on the project. These were reversed out, but in fact, those costs were eligible costs. And so as I continue like this, I can see that in conclusion, once I've made all the corrections in my review, my total disallowances, had I not reviewed and corrected, would have been nearly 15,000. And at the same time, there was nearly 10,000 in costs that were eligible that I hadn't posted because I'd missed out various months, etc. Plus, there's the consequence of the 7% admin fee on that. So had I not done my review, I could have just lost my organisation 26,000, which is an incredible sum of money. And this just, I hope, reinforces how important review is, because on a first impression, we thought we were doing well at 101% spent. But as we get into the detail, and this is the detail that the auditors will find as well, we realise that actually that result would have meant that we were 26,000 out of pocket, and that would have had to come from unrestricted funds. So I hope this really focuses your mind on how important it is to be reviewing all those patterns and expenditure, all the descriptions, doing your sense checks, working with the review checklist to really get to the bottom of our eligible spend in our project.